Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Melissa. Today, we are going to talk about transitioning between design mediums and design teams. So to kick it off, this is a two-part talk. The first part, we're going to talk a little bit about our design careers. And more specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about what is the path and what does it look like, right? How do we get from the beginning to where we are today? And to do that, I'm going to share a little bit about my own design career and what I've learned along the way about what that path looks like. So although I'm a product designer, I actually went to college for architecture. So I made drawings like this, plans, sections, things of that nature. And at the time, the professors in architecture school taught me to think about my career in a very specific way. And that looked something like this path. So they said, hey, to become a licensed architect, you have to get your undergrad. You then have to get your master's. You then have to do a couple years of what's called IDP, or I think there's a new name for it, but it's basically interning and getting your experience. You have to study for a bunch of exams, and then you are a licensed architect. This is what I was taught. That's what I thought the career path looked like. The bad side about this was that whole path took somewhat of 10 or so years. It's a long path, and it has a lot of steps, and you have to do it in that order. But the good was that it was very linear. I didn't have to think about it, right? So I went into college, and they were like, hey, you do boom, 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 you are a licensed architect. And I was like, cool, that sounds awesome. Sign me up. Just when I thought I understood what my career path was going to look like, some really big things happened in the world that kind of shook up my entire understanding of my career. So 2008, who was in college during 2008? Raise your hand. Okay, a lot of us. I think you will remember what happened in 2008. So the first thing that happened in 2008 was the recession hit. And what happened with the recession? The economy fell apart. A lot of industries collapsed. But what's really interesting about 2008 is something also really positive happened. And that is that the iPhone was born in 2007 and the App Store launched in 2008. So what did that mean for me as a designer? Well, it meant two things. The recession meant that architecture was paused. It was a really, really difficult time to become an architect. On the flip side, the App Store was the beginning of an entirely new design industry. So tech startups, product design, this was the very, very beginning. And so as a junior in architecture school, I was like, I don't know what to do. This is crazy, right? I wanted to be an architect, but it wasn't really going to happen very easily. And so I chose the path of the iOS App Store. I chose the path of the tech startups. And so when I chose this path, it wasn't a direct slam dunk, hey, I'm going to go from architecture to product design. I didn't have the hard skills to become a product designer. I was an architect. But what I did have was I had a lot of soft skills. So I used my soft skills at the time to become a manager. So I transitioned in, and I came in and said, hey, I can manage projects. Architects learn this. They're very good at sort of breaking up a project into lots of little pieces. And I did a lot of stuff like this. So I made Gantt charts, I managed tasks, I managed developers, I managed designers. And just when I thought my career was back on track, yet again, another unexpected thing happened. So this whole linear thing, not really working out, right? And what happened was my gut started to speak up, right? So I was a maker in college. I was an architect. And somehow managing makers and managing developers and designers wasn't the same thing. And so I had to think hard about that. I had to say to myself, well, what does that mean? What do I want to do, right? So I turned to a friend of mine in New York at the time and said, Matthias, I would really like to become a product designer. How do I make this happen? Matthias at the time was leading Behance, which was acquired by Adobe. And his advice to me was learn from someone you admire. Now, this was not the kind of advice that I learned in architecture school. They were all like, hey, go get your master's, do these degrees, et cetera. But because product design was so new, this was actually a really great piece of advice. It was the best way to kind of transition. And so what I did, I actually cold emailed a designer that I admired in New York, and that led me to work at a startup called Mixel. And reaching out, saying, hey, I would like to learn, I want an internship. That was how I transitioned from being a manager of makers in the tech startup world to being an actual maker. And so what ended up happening was I transitioned to Mixel. I then moved on to Loverly, and then I made my way to Percolate. And so this one transition put me on a new trajectory. So again, I was starting to feel good about this path thing. It's starting to feel more linear. And yet again, unexpected thing happened. And that was that Percolate at the time was a New York City startup, and they were looking to build a team in San Francisco. They said to me, hey, Melissa, do you want to move to California and start that design team? I said, sure, that sounds like a pretty good adventure, you know, but not what I had in the plans, but sure, I'll take it. So I packed up my bags in New York City and I traveled, and that was me getting very lucky on my first day in San Francisco, getting the bridge with a lot of sun. And I did it. I made it happen. What? I know, right? They fooled me day one. I know, it's remarkable. But, you know, this is all to say that I was, you know, I thought my career was going to be linear, but it really was a lot of unexpected transitions. And last but not least, once I found myself in San Francisco, I was driven by the curiosity of being surrounded by really large tech startups. So last fall, I made my way to Dropbox, where I'm now a product designer. So that was a short recap of my last 8 years. But what did I show you? I said at the beginning that I thought my design career was going to be a linear path. In actuality, this is what happened in 8 years. I made 3 massive transitions that were all very unexpected. So I went from architecture to product design. I went from a lot of small startups to a very big startup, and I moved cities. I moved from New York City tech to San Francisco tech. So that begs the question of, well, what is a modern design career, right? It's probably not very linear. And so at the same time, I started to blog. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, I was thinking a lot about my transition from architecture to product design. I was excited about the ideas, and I shared them with the world. And what I learned was something very interesting, was that there were a lot of other people who were making the same transition. So all of these people through the Twitter/Medium universe have found me, or we found each other, and we all were making the same transition, right? And so what this signaled to me was, hey, not only is this type of career path, my own career path, it's not linear, but it's actually quite common. There are more people who are doing this, this career path. And so at a broader scale, what I've learned in 8 years so far is that our design careers include a lot of transitions, right? It's a pretty broad statement, but I think that we can safely say this is quite true. And that can be from medium to medium. It can be from team to team. But there's a lot of unexpected transitions that are happening, right? And so what does that modern career path look like? Sheryl Sandberg has a great quote where she talks about the modern career. And although she's not a designer, I think this is quite true for my own career path and probably something that you all can relate to. And she says, "A jungle gym scramble is the best description of my career. I could never have connected the dots from where I started to where I am today," right? So it's not a ladder. It's a jungle gym. We're jumping around. We're not sure where we're going to go. Sometimes we're climbing. Sometimes we're falling. Sometimes we're dangling, and it's, you know, what's going to happen? We're going to fall to the ground. Sometimes we're helping each other up. This is what a modern career path looks like, and I think specifically for design, this is very true. And so what's interesting to think about is why we make these jumps, right? So we're going to be jumping a lot. We're making a lot of transitions. Why do we make them? Happens for a lot of reasons. So for me, the first one was timing. You never know what's going to be happening, but timing is a big factor, right? So I did not know when I went to architecture school that I was going to graduate in the recession. Like, that was not a thing I planned. But it happened, and I had to run with it. You have to roll with it, right? They're unexpected things. Curiosity. You go into your adventure, you have X curiosity, your X interest, right? Throughout the adventure, you become interested in something new. You want to open your eyes, right? This is a natural thing that happens to us, especially as designers. We are always like, ooh, what's that? What's that, right? Like we want to go touch new things and experience new things. And lastly, growth. I think we all want to grow. And so at various points in my career, whenever I felt like I had absorbed as much as I could in that part of the adventure, I jumped and I transitioned to grow, to try something new, right? So the takeaway here is there's a lot of reasons why we transition. A lot of them we don't know until they're happening, but listen to your gut, listen to your your feelings. They're going to lead you in new and unexpected ways. And so because transitions is this focus of the talk, and I think we've established that we're all going to make a lot of transitions in our design career, it's helpful to understand, well, what are the phases of a transition? So there's a famous book called Transitions, and it talks a lot about transitions as having 3 distinct parts. So there is a ending, there's a new beginning, and there's something in the middle called the neutral zone. And so basically what that middle part is that like awkward feeling of when you've left some phase of your life or you've left some journey and you're about to go into something new and you're like, I don't really know what's happening. This is all kind of uncomfortable, right? There's a neutral zone. And the question for designers is, well, if we're going to be making a lot of transitions, how do we get from an ending to a new beginning? How do we navigate that neutral zone? What does that feel like? Similarly, it's important for us to think about the way that teams come together and the way that teams form. So this is something called Tuckman's model. Raise your hand if you've heard of this before. Yeah, okay, wow, a lot of hands. All right, so basically what this is talking about is the way that teams come together is they go through 4 stages. So when teams come together, they're beginning to form. And the forming is when they're literally like in the same room next to each other, right? They're coming together physically. The next part is storming. So storming is like when they haven't really figured out each other yet. They don't have sort of a gelled process. It's kind of stormy phase, like this is not really working that well together. Norming is after you've started to work a little bit closely together, you start to normalize, you are more in sync, you're feeling better about things. And then only after you make it through those 3 phases that you can start performing, right? And so even though this is about teams, I think, again, it's very similar to the things that we feel when we're a designer, when we find ourselves in a new transition, right? So we form, we go to this new medium, or we go to this new team, but it takes us a while before we can start performing, right? So we have to make it through the storming and the norming phases. And a lot of people don't talk about those phases, right? They just say, hey, here's your new team. You're in this new company, right? Start performing. But the reality is you have to make it through a couple of steps in between. And so that brings me to the question of, well, how do we get from forming to performing as designers? And so with that, I'm going to offer you a framework for how to navigate design transitions. And this is sort of applicable for mediums. This is applicable for teams. It's really just as a designer, how do you transition from one thing to the next, right? And so this is based, I would say, on my own experience, watching others. I'm sharing with you all for the first time today, so we'll see how it goes. But I think it will make sense to you. And so there are 5 phases that you go through when you transition. So the first phase is absorb. We're going to dig into all these. Second, digest. Third, research. Fourth, respond. And last is reflect, okay? Let's dig in. What is absorbing? So as designers, when we're in the beginning of something new, it's a little bit overwhelming, right? So you're like, new team, new process, new medium, what's happening? And so the level of newness might be small, it might be large, but there's a lot of newness happening, right? So the best thing you should do during this phase is be a sponge. I know this is hard because we want to jump in and we want to perform, but you have to be a sponge in these early days. What you need to do is observe, take it all in, and let it soak in, right? So for me, I most recently experienced this when I joined this team, which is the Dropbox design team. And why it was so important for me to be a sponge in this particular setting was because it was my first time working with this many designers. So I had never worked with 80 designers before. I also had never worked with so many different types of designers. So the way our team is made up is we have brand design, we have product design, we have user research, we have UX writing. I didn't know what it felt like to be on a team of this size with this many different types of designers. So I had to be a sponge, right? I had to come in and I had to let it soak in. I had to keep my eyes open and just absorb what was happening to me. So in the absorb phase, the key thing here is when you're in a transition for a new design medium or team, just observe the environment, absorb it all, and let it soak in, right? That's the first step. You're not going to be performing right away. Once you have done your absorbing, and this can take a day, it can take a week, it can take longer, you're starting to make sense of things, and the next phase is digesting. And a helpful exercise that I think you probably will find yourself doing the digesting phase is comparing your old to your new design environment And the beginning, it's really looking for similarities, right? Because you're looking for things that make sense to you. So for me, I experienced this when I moved from architecture to product design. And at the time, I made things like this. And what was I doing here? I was trying to understand what about architecture and product design were similar. And so this actually began as a sketch on a commute on the way home from New York to New Jersey one day, and I turned it into an actual diagram, but it was just exploring, right? I was digesting what was happening. And what I'm exploring here is this idea that the floors in a building are very similar to the screens in an app, just as the way you get between them, so the stairs in a building are very similar to the navigation or tabs that you might see in an app. But if you think about where I was in my transition, this was like the digestion phase. I was like trying to be like, what is happening here? What about these two things are similar, right? At the same time, I was exploring things like, whoops, you can't see part of that, sorry, but the gray is very light. I was exploring things like, well, what about the process is the same, right? So what's similar to me? This is sections and plans from architecture. And I was thinking about that in the context of product design and saying, well, that's actually a lot like what you do with wireframing, right? So it's the stage of the process when it's not about the colors, it's not about the visual textures, but it's about the user experience, and it's about the way people move through a design, right? But again, this is digesting. This is me making sense of my old environment and my new environment. And why this was so important is because it was comforting and it was stabilizing, right? So when you can take your old and your new and you can see the similarities, you can see the parallels, that's when you feel good about where you are. That's when you can make that jump. So the first takeaway for digest is to look for the similarities, right? And anchor on them for stability in your transition. That's the first part of digesting. The second part of digesting is the flip side of that, right? So you're gonna be like, yes, I found all these similarities, that's awesome. You need to also look for the differences. And maybe the differences will pop out to you first, but they're equally as important for a very different reason. So the similarities are about stabilizing, comforting. The differences are about the areas of weakness or the gaps between your old and your new. And so this was a really big moment for me when I made this diagram. And what I'm doing here is I was comparing the way that you make architecture to the way you make product design or you make products. And the major difference for me as I was trying to explore in this diagram was that architecture projects have a very definitive start and they have a very definitive ending. So the process is like literally here, you boom, 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 you're done. Products, on the other hand, are never really done, right? So products have a definitive start and you kind of cyclically like go through them, you iterate, you iterate, you iterate. But you can see that arrow on the end never really ends, right? It just keeps going. And so why this was so important to me during the digestion phase was because it signaled to me something that I'd never really understood before, right? My training was in architecture, so I knew how to design products or knew how to design things that had an end. I didn't know how to design things that just went on forever, right? So this highlighted the areas of the gaps, right? The things I need to learn more about. And so when I transitioned, I looked at this and said, okay, I need to learn more about these cycles. What does validation mean? How do you measure it? What is success? Why do you cycle? All of those pieces, right? And learning that at this stage was really key for the next parts of my transition moving forward. And so just as we talked about the similarities and the reason for why you look for the similarities, it's equally as important, again, to look for the differences because these signal the gaps. And these are really, really important as you're plotting your next steps in your transition. This is also true for teams as well. This is about a medium, but it's about a team too, the parts that you don't understand. And so once you have figured out your similarities and once you figure out your differences, it's now time to dig in. So you have sort of like a solid footing of like the areas you totally understand. You have a clear understanding of the parts that you just like don't get at all. And you want to dig in. You want to do research. And so for me, that was a very particularly meaningful step on the Dropbox design team because as I had mentioned, this was my first time in a company of this size. I didn't quite understand how things worked just at face value. And sometimes that's true even on a small team, right? You don't know what's happening. And so what I did is about 3 or 4 weeks in, I said to my manager, I said, hey, I would like to research our team. Like, how would you feel about that? They were like, go for it. Just research, interview people. And so what I did is I collected names of people who could give me a good understanding of how things worked at Dropbox. And so I put together 14 people, across engineering, product, and design. This is sort of the swath of them up here, with the goal of learning, so interviewing them and learning more. And so what I did is I asked 3 particular questions. The first question, I said, how does your team operate today? Second, I wanted to know what works well. And then third was what could be improved. And so doing these interviews, it was about 1 interview per person, right? I learned a lot in a very short time frame about all things Dropbox design. And that was incredible, right? Because it taught me, it made it easier for me to transition into this environment. Additionally, I also documented it and shared it with the team. And that was a great artifact as a new person in a new environment to say, hey, like, here are some things I've learned about where we're excelling, and here are some opportunities that maybe we want to work on, right? I think we're all like in the, we want to grow and improve world of thinking about things. So that was a good thing to share with them. And so the key thing in the research step is really all about digging in and asking questions about your new design environment. Just as you might dig in with users in your, you know, if you're all product designers, just as you might interview a user, interview your team, like learn about them, right? And as I said, the bonus here is if you can document those findings and you can share them with your team, it's a great way to say, hey, I'm a new employee, like, here's some learnings about it. It's also great for future new employees to pass that along and say, hey, like, here's some highlights about how we work, and here's how the design team is sort of faring at the moment. So once you've made it through these 3 stages, you have made it to the point when you can really start joining the conversation. And so it's amazing to think that you have to go through 3 stages, but to be honest, you kind of do, right? You have to like give yourself the moment to absorb, you have to digest all the things, you have to do a little research, dig in to learn more about the areas that are gray, and only after you sort of feel good about all the things in your new design team or your new design environment can you begin to respond. You can join the conversation. And more viscerally, what that looks like is just you can start joining, raising your hand. You can offer opinions, right? You have a solid footing to be a part of the conversation. And so at Dropbox Design, one of the ways that I join the conversation, I recommend this, is once you've done your research, take the opportunities and ask yourself, do you have any recommendations on how to improve or things that you can offer to the team to help them move forward, right? So in our research, we found that this was an opportunity for the team. And basically the opportunities, we framed it in a how might we format, but how might we balance long and short-term product thinking? This is not something that we don't do today. It's just something that the team in a number of interviews had cited as something they wanted to improve or something they wanted to move forward on. And why this was so particularly useful to me was because as I looked at all the opportunities that I found, this one jumped out as one that I actually had a solution for. So something that I'd done in the past that I said, hey, I can offer this to Dropbox Design as a solution for this particular area. And what that solution was something that we've called vision or version. And this was something that I had done at a previous company called Percolate. And the idea between vision and version is basically at the beginning of a project, you say, is this a vision project or is it a version project? So is it a vision, meaning is a longer term thinking project? Are we going to redesign something? Are we going to overhaul something? Is it like a very long-term goal? Or is this a version? So in product design, sometimes you just have to do the next iteration, right? The version, the incremental increase. And so again, going back to this question, how might we balance long and short-term product thinking? Being able to offer them a framework and say, hey, like I've used this framework in the past, vision or version. That was a really powerful way for me to join that conversation, to respond and to be a part of this new team. The great thing about it is since we have talked about it last fall, we've now started to integrate it into our early stage documents when we're talking about new projects. So at this point, it's cool for me as a relatively new employee to see how I had done research, I'd found an opportunity, I recommended something, and now the team has started to adopt it. And I think that's sort of the validation that all new people in new design environments kind of need when you're transitioning, right? And so the key takeaway here, and this is really the response can come in many different forms, but for me, I offer you this recommendation of if in your research you see an opportunity or something that could be improved and you have the answer, you have a way to help the team move forward, that's a great way to share a solution to a problem that they are currently having or something that they want to move the ball on. So that's the respond phase. So really largely, once you make it to the respond phase, whether you're transitioning from design mediums or when you're transitioning from design teams or even just from projects, you're pretty well acquainted with your new design environment. You've made it from forming to performing. You've made it from the ending to the new beginning. But the thing you have to do at the very end is reflect. And so I think a lot of times while we're going through transitions, it's kind of a messy thing for us, right? We're kind of like, what's happening? I don't know. It's a lot to handle. But once you've made it to the respond phase, it's actually usually pretty clear for you what has happened and what has transpired. And that is the moment that you want to either publicly or privately. Privately is totally a great option. Just write it down, right? So what you want to do is you want to think about what was happening, think about what it felt like, think about the different stages of your transition, and you want to write it down. And the reason that you want to do this is, number one, you want to get it out of your head. You need to make space in your head, right? Because you're in a new design environment. You want to start performing. You don't want to be thinking about this transition anymore. Get it out of your head, get it on paper. Number two, it helps you to clarify. So often when you're writing it down, you clarify the journey. You can clarify what you're feeling, clarify your thoughts. And number three is, it's great just in your career. Once you've written down a lot of your journeys, you can look back and you can say, wow, like this is what I thought, my first design transition, or here's how I felt in the last one, right? And you can see how you've grown over all of them, and that's a great thing to have. For me specifically, earlier in my career, totally private in terms of journaling and writing down all these things. Totally okay. Do not have to blog. But if you reach a point when you have a moment in your career that is particularly insightful or something that you really feel you want to share with the world, I've had a lot of fun in those moments sharing them. Because I think what has happened to me is that I've learned so much from people who have shared their transitions. And then what happens is if you share yours, people start reaching out to you. And it's a sort of like we're all growing together, we're all transitioning, moving forward. And it's like paying it forward, right? You're paying forward your journey and you're helping others in their journey. And so these articles, I think, helped a lot of people, hopefully. And I've had a lot of fun as they've reached out to me. And so again, the last stage is really the reflection stage. So privately or publicly reflect on your design journey. It's a powerful way to document and clarify and share your experiences. And so last but not least, transitions are not easy. So I know that I have painted a picture of you just do these 5 steps and you're good to go. The reality is it's really hard, right? It's emotionally difficult. There's a lot of nights where you're like, I'm so lost. I don't know what's happening. Like it's stressful. So as we come to a close, I want to leave you with this thought, which a lot of people don't talk about, but the importance of taking care of yourself. So the next time you're transitioning from a team to a new medium to a new company, don't forget to take care of yourself. Your physical health is going to need to be, you need to take care of yourself in order to make it through and to be the best you are in your new design environment. So for me, these 3 things are no matter what I am doing, what city I'm in, no matter what's happening. I am a swimmer, so I always make time to swim. I always find a pool, I get in. Eating, make sure that you're not eating junk food during these transitions. You might be working long hours, but take care of yourself, eat the right food, be a healthy person, and sleep. Do not underestimate the power of sleep. And sometimes during transitions is when you sleep the most because it's a lot. You're processing a lot. Like I find myself sometimes like 10 hours. I'm like, what happens? I don't know. But take care of yourself. Transitions are rough. And designers, we're always analyzing all the things. We want it to be perfect. We want to move forward. But it doesn't happen that way. The other piece is give it time. Transitions do not happen overnight. Transitions do not take a week. They don't take a month. They don't take a year. They're all different. And you have to just let it run its course. It takes time to feel comfortable in a new design environment. I transitioned from architecture 8 years ago. I think it probably took me 4 years to feel comfortable in product design, right? I've been at Dropbox Design for 7 months. It took a few months for me to really understand what was happening. Give yourself the benefit of time. Don't rush it. It's going to feel better. And so the takeaways for this talk, 2 key things. So our design careers will include many transitions. I think this is a fact. Whether or not you have transitioned a lot already or you're not sure where you're going to go, take comfort in knowing that our careers will have a lot of transitions, and many of them will be unexpected for a lot of reasons that we don't know right now, right? This is a normal thing. This is a normal part of being a designer. And last but not least, The next time you find yourself in a transition, so whether or not you're in a new medium, a new team, a new company, a new project, whatever it is, remember these 5 phases. Take time to absorb, let it all sink in. Digest, so look for the similarities between old and new. Feel those as stabilizing factors. Look for the differences and highlight those as areas to dig into. Conduct research. Talk to the people in your new environment. Learn more about it. Dig in. Ask questions. Respond. So once you feel pretty good about where you are, raise your hand. Join the conversation. Offer some opinions. If you can, offer like a solution to something that was an opportunity. And don't forget to reflect. Take the time to privately and or publicly, privately mostly usually works, write down your journey. Write it down, clarify your thoughts, document them. You will thank yourself later for doing it. That's all I have for you. I think we have Q&A, but that's it. All right.